particularly distressed by the deal apparently he's reached with the Chinese on his current trip, which, as I read the agreement, requires the Chinese to do nothing at all for 16 years, while these carbon emission regulations are creating havoc in my state and other states around the country.
The President Barack Obama farewell tour has now taken him to Australia, where he is pledging billions of dollars to the Green Climate Fund, something that isn't sitting well with his Australian hosts, and has plenty of Americans up in arms about where our money is going in the fight against what is either real or still junk science: climate change. Let's welcome back to MidPoint, recognized as an expert on climate modeling. He works in NASA as the director of the Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York. Gavin Schmidt joins us. Gavin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
As we hear now what has happened with this U.S.-China deal, it has been called by some in the Obama administration a game changer. Others say it's terrible and it doesn't matter one way or the other. Which side are you on?
So, like a lot of things, it's a little bit of both. It is really very significant in terms of the international negotiations on reducing emissions, but in and of itself, it isn't what's required to actually reduce emissions on the ground or make sure that the climate that we leave our children is going to be one in which they recognize this planet.
Let's look at this when you say what's necessary to be done. The administration has promised that the United States will cut the greenhouse gases by between 26 and 28% by 2025. Is that real? Can that happen?
I think it can happen. The changes that we've had so far that have been due to a whole bunch of different things, the move to shale gas, the CAFE standards, regulations on mercury emissions from coal, all sorts of random things, are putting us on a trajectory to reduce emissions in the US 17% by 2020. And so this is, it's along that trajectory. It isn't going to be that much more trouble.
But the deal we signed with China, we're putting an awful lot of money into that right now. Is that really wasted money? Because doesn't this mean that the Chinese are taking real baby steps and we're the ones funding what they're doing?
So the agreement to reduce emissions that they announced yesterday doesn't actually come with any money attached to it. That's a very separate thing. The Green Climate Fund, the $3 billion that has been talked about recently, that's a long-term commitment. It still needs to be approved by Congress, of course, because that's a spending bill. But that is for people around the world to build resilience, to help them adapt to climate change, to help them invest in clean energy and better infrastructure. That's not tied to the Chinese issue particularly.
Well, with the Chinese issue, though, the way that I understand it, the Chinese have until 2030 or sometime around then for their carbon emissions expected to peak, and there are still some critics who say that the Chinese aren't doing enough now to begin with, and they really won't do enough even with this agreement. Do you get the sense that this is going to be something that will hold the Chinese feet to the literal coal fire, if you will, to actually do something, when in effect, certainly China and some other countries are worse polluters than America is?
Right now, that's true, but on a per capita basis, it isn't. We're still one of the most inefficient countries, large countries in the world, and we're contributing about 20% of the carbon emissions. China is contributing about 25% of the emissions right now, which is obviously a huge chunk, and their emissions are slated to grow quite strongly. Now, you know, if you've got something that's accelerating, it takes a while to turn that around, and so the emissions that they're going to be having in 2030, the investments to reduce those emissions need to be starting now. So it really isn't the case that this agreement is nothing for them and for another 15 years. They have to start now to plan for peak emissions at around that time. That's much better than any previous commitment from the Chinese has been. And given that a lot of people have been concerned that the US or Europe shouldn't be doing anything until everybody else is on board, particularly the Chinese. This really is quite a game changer in terms of those international negotiations.
So let me get your opinion here when it comes down to what we can do, because there's so much about the fact of what we need to do, where we want to go, and a lot of people are very concerned, as you heard Mitch McConnell talk, perhaps that this is going to hurt the economy of states. What can we do then in order to bring down the emissions, make ourselves cleaner, and not severely impact our economic growth?
Well, I think the key, and this is really just my opinion, I mean, the key is that we should be discouraging people from doing things that use the atmosphere as a waste dump for what we put into it. And we should be paying people to do things that are better for society in the long run. It's a question of pricing externalities. Right now, it's free, basically, to put carbon dioxide into the air, even though we know that there are consequences down the line that are going to cost us money. It doesn't really take very much to preference one thing over another, and there's many different ways that the administration and individual states have found to do that. Whether it's renewable standards, whether it's efficiency codes for buildings, whether it's subsidies for new tech development and research, all of those things can play a role, and all of those things actually are reducing emissions in the US. In China, it's a slightly different problem. There is a lot of old technology that's being used. They aren't using the latest technology for cleaning out the pollution. I'm sure you've seen the pictures from Beijing and the air quality that they have.
We're looking at them right now, as a matter of fact, too.
That's much worse than we ever had in this country. It's much worse than Pittsburgh in the 50s or LA. It really is killing people at the rate of tens to hundreds of thousands a year.
Isn't that fair? Isn't that fair to say, though, that part of the problem is that in this whole agreement with China, they can still continue to build coal-powered plants? That's in their plans. The idea is that they're going to stop doing that to the same extent. They're also building more solar power out than anybody else. They're also building more nuclear power than anybody else. So there's a lot of things that they're doing, and I think we should be encouraging them to reduce their coal use and pick up on the other technologies that they're using. Fair to say, though, that the Chinese don't always keep their environmental promises?
The problem with China is that it isn't a very well-governed country. China has a lot of different players. We sometimes look at it as if it's just the central government and they tell everybody what to do. But the regions and the state operating enterprises have a lot of autonomy, and the reporting of what they're polluting and how much stuff they're doing is not always very accurate. So we have NASA's been tracking pollution levels across China from satellites, and it doesn't match up with what the official numbers say. So we have to be aware that China
we have to hold their feet to the fire. Absolutely.
And we certainly do, yes.
Unfortunately, we're all out of time. Dr. Gavin Schmidt, thanks so much for joining us. We'll look forward to the next time, and stay tuned because MidPoint will continue.